Welcome to the new year. Got a lot to talk about. Let's get right into it. Roll it, Kyle. While most of us have started this year with a feeling of celebration and positivity, a couple of families in West Baton Rouge did not get that opportunity. Tonight I want to talk about an incident that took place on New Year's Eve across the river, as we say here, where 3 high school kids had their lives impacted. 16-year-old Caroline Gill and 17-year-old Maggie Dunn lost their lives, while Maggie's brother Liam is fighting for his currently. Our first guest on the show here is District Attorney Tony Clayton there in West Baton Rouge. And Mr. District Attorney, I know that there are details about this that you cannot get into because it's an in-process situation. So if I ask about something you can't talk about, please tell me, because we don't want to interrupt the process, due process for both sides. When were you made aware that this happened?
So it was early New Year's Day. I was out of town and I got a call from the former district attorney from over there, my prior boss, Ricky Ward, who sent me a link, and I started reading up on it. Immediately thereafter, I contacted the investigating officers, and we began to converse back and forth about the facts surrounding this circumstance.
And your decision to charge the way you did, what motivated it?
So the decision to actually make the charge was done by the investigative agency. That doesn't parlay over to the district attorney's office. Once they've done the charge, then I take it from there. Mm-hmm. So they did the investigation. They decided to make the charge. But before they officially charged, we all talked about it. We all roundtabled. We watched the videos. We studied the facts and the whole 9 yards. And ultimately, West Baton Rouge Parish detectives, lead detective Zach Simmers at that time, made the call to make the arrest.
I know, again, there are things about this that you can't talk about, but what can you share with us about this from the perspective of your office?
That's a great question, and I'll tell you what I can. I can share this with you, that I think Louisiana needs to revisit the policy on pursuits. I personally, Clay, find that you have to give me some real exigent circumstance to justify a police officer blowing through a red light. You just don't do it. Mm-hmm. But Louisiana has a law that says that you must stop or slow down and make sure that that intersection is safe before you proceed through it. I believe the law should be revisited because it gives, for example, volunteer firemen the right to exercise the same caution. Mm-hmm. They have no training. In my opinion, I've seen them just put the little red lights on their pickup trucks and just willy-nilly speed down the road. And so I can't think of a situation where that person should have the right to go through a light. Even if he were instructed to slow down, he doesn't have the training. That light cannot be seen. But if you take that and you take it over to the officer, mm-hmm. I'll tell you here's the rub about this statute.
Okay.
Police officers belong to a unique and special fraternity.
Right.
It's an honorable fraternity.
Yep.
And the people and the men and women that serve in that organization are made of certain strength and certain character. Mm-hmm. But every now and then there's a person that slips through, a bad apple of sorts, and that person gets into that fraternity. And that person may not be inherently a bad person, a good person, but he or she doesn't possess the necessary restraints. And what I mean by that is, when you pursuing, and you may see that in this case, pursuing a suspect at 100 miles an hour, and you get into that adrenaline mode, and your adrenaline is pumping, and that adrenaline turns to tunnel vision, and that tunnel vision turns into killing kids, then you must know inherently that blue lights do not give you the authority to part the Red Sea.
For Louisiana, how do you create some kind of uniformity in policy across all parishes so that this kind of thing doesn't happen?
It's going to take the stakeholders. For example, the state of Indiana, January the 1st, put in effect a new law as it relates to pursuits. The time of day, the roads, for example, Highway 1, there's a community every 2 miles, there's a red light. Mm-hmm. You ought not do 100-mile-an-hour pursuits down Highway 1.
Sure.
Interstate, you're pursuing a guy who's headed to go hurt somebody or kidnap a kid, maybe so. But under that circumstance, it has to be carefully monitored by supervisors the whole 9 yards. So time of day, the conditions of the road, the traffic. I mean, it's New Year's Eve, and it's the most traveled holiday other than before Thanksgiving. You ought not be doing them. But that's just me, and I think we ought to look at it. We ought to bring guys like yourselves and me and other stakeholders to determine how do we modify this pursuit law.
As this goes on, could we get you to come back and kind of update what's going on in as much as you can talk about this?
Clay, I'm a little older than you, but I've been a fan of yours since we were in college, and I would do whatever you tell me to do within reason.
Within reason. I appreciate that caveat at the end right there. West Baton Rouge District Attorney Tony Clayton, he's one of the best, and we'll be watching this, and my thoughts and prayers are with the families of these children. What a horrible way to start the year. But Mr. District Attorney, thank you so much.
It's in you.
Back with Matt Mascona in just a moment. You know, normally when Matt is here, we jump right out of the gate, poking at each other and giving each other grief. We're going to delay that a couple minutes in this one because we were together on Monday as LSU played in the bowl game, and then later that evening there was a Monday Night Football game, and something that most people had never witnessed before happened right in front of millions as Buffalo Bills safety Damar Hamlin collapsed. His heart stopped beating for about 10 minutes. They gave him CPR, got his heart beating again, got him off the field, got him to the hospital now, and he is fighting for his life. So, you know, I wanted to ask, what were your initial thoughts, obviously, when you saw it? And then grade for me the way the NFL took care of business that night.
When I first saw it, so I'm a MMA fan.
Sure.
And you see guys get knocked unconscious.
Oh, yeah.
It's routine.
Yep.
When I saw Damar Hamlin get up and fall, that's what I thought happened. It was just a delayed loss of blood and collapsed. But when you saw the concern on all the players' faces, it was pretty clear. We later learned they were watching a man be defibrillated. I thought that the NFL, while there's no blueprint to handle something like that, the fact that when the ambulance left the field, they gave the players 5 minutes to warm up because they were anticipating resuming the game was embarrassing for the league.
Yeah.
And the players essentially said, hell with that.
Yeah.
None of them moved. They just went to the locker rooms. It's an unenviable situation, obviously, from an organizational standpoint, but none of that, as everyone said, none of that matters.
Nope.
I mean, it's you're if the game's a no contest, it's what it is. You figure it out moving forward. The concern is for a man who, like, medically died on the field.
Yeah.
And they had to bring him back to life.
Yeah.
But I think the way that the coverage has been appropriate and was that night as well.
How does this change, if at all, the way the NFL conducts business? Because the hit wasn't a vicious tackle. It was just, I mean, it was fairly routine. Does it have any impact on anything?
I don't think so. I think if there's one thing that maybe needs to be stated, it's if you actually put into context what the medical personnel did on the field, it's pretty remarkable, Clay.
Yeah.
Like medical doctors on staff that are there at the stadium, normally it's you've got a ligament, a bone, something like that. You're not running onto the field anticipating a man's heart
has stopped
or not breathing.
Yeah.
And think about how quickly they acted when something like that, time is of the essence. And I think that probably hasn't been said enough and shouldn't go understated. Is a huge hat tip to the medical personnel at the stadium, at Paul Brown Stadium that night for the job that they did. But to your question, I don't know what the NFL can do. I mean, Clay, it was a freak thing, man. It wasn't a vicious hit.
Nope.
A player just ran into another player, which you see literally thousands of times every Sunday.
It's fortunate that there is at least a level 1 trauma center in every NFL city, and I think that's good. We're just glad the kid's alive. He's fighting for his life. I pray for the best for him. I want to change gears just a bit here to talk about Monday. Again, watching the LSU game, going into the bowl game, you pretty much suspected LSU was going to win, but
63-7. And keep in mind, LSU didn't have their starting running back Josh Williams, no Kayshawn, no Jeray Jenkins, no Jack Besh. 3 of their starting 4 defensive linemen. When you were already short on defensive line, no Mekhi Garner. That was a shorthanded LSU team that went and rolled Purdue 63-7. That was the feel good you needed after the A&M loss and after the Georgia loss.
Well, now that the entire year is over, and you look back at it, anyone who's critical at this point just wants to be a hater.
You've got to keep in mind, context matters so much. Remember, look, not just that the last 2 years under Ed Ogeron, you had a losing record, but think about all of the ancillary stuff. I mean, you had a coach in bed with pictures with women, and you had, I mean, threatening people on a radio show, and it was just one PR nightmare after another on top of all the bad football. And in 1 year, Brian Kelly has you in the SEC championship game. You won 10 games. Like, I think LSU is going to be favored to win the West next year, considering Bryce Young's leaving Alabama, what LSU has coming back, and what the rest of the West looks like. I mean, the feeling today as opposed to 12 months ago is just dramatically different.
I got a minute. So after the LSU game, again, we were together watching the game. After the LSU game, the most volume in the place was the Tulane USC, USC game. So in less than a minute now, that was pretty amazing. Tulane beat USC.
It's not surprising. I mean, there was a 2-point spread. But listen, the biggest thing about bowl games now, who wants to be there? For Tulane, that was the biggest bowl game in 90 years, literally, since the 1930s for Tulane. And for USC, they were a loss in the Pac-12 championship away from playing in the playoff. It mattered. It was a great game. It mattered so much to Tulane.
So in 2 weeks, I got to get you back here to handicap the NFL playoffs.
Okay.
And I want you to talk about that again. We're going to keep it civil here.
No, we won't.
We're not going to keep it civil when you come back. No, when you come back, it's on. But just today, it's first one of the year. We'll be nice.
It's a new year, new beginnings.
Speaking of the new year, let's get you ready for it. Julio Melara is on the desk next. You know, I'm a big believer in the way that your mindset sits determines your direction, how you get the year done. And one of the best people to tell you about that is here with me right now, Julio Melara, President and CEO of the Baton Rouge Business Report and Register 225 Mag. And he's also a motivational speaker who goes around the country and helps people get their engine running in the right way. But before we get into that, you know, I think, again, mindset, the way people are mentally impacts the start of the year. You were here on set as Tony Clayton was talking about this thing in Addis. So it leads me to a discussion about tragedy in the third quarter of the year. How do you jumpstart your year when you may have a somber thing hanging over your head?
Yeah, that's a real great question. You know, trials and tribulation are part of life, right? Even in the ancient scriptures, it said that in this world you would have tribulation. And I think that, again, mindset is really, really the key, because every battle that takes place in the mind first, right? And I think that being a good steward of your mind on a daily basis, you know, life has ups and life has downs, right? And unfortunately, for most people's lives, they're living where they're reactionary, right? Up and down, up and down, up and down. But life has a cadence. It has a rhythm, and our life should be like this, you know. It's almost like we can't get too high when things are going great, and don't get too low when things are not going great, right? Because again, life has a cadence, and you know, kind of going back to your point, I think out of everything, you know, sometimes you hear speakers say, you know, mindset is probably the most important thing that we bring to life. And there's two distinctive things between mindset and attitude, because people confuse both. People think, oh, attitude is everything. Well, attitude is not everything, but it's the most important thing that we bring to life, because mindset is the way we see the world, but attitude is how we interact with the world according to we see it. And I'm just a big believer that every day, if you're grateful, right, it helps you confront some of the challenges that are right in front of you every day. If you're looking for solutions, right? If you build on what's right, and you've gotten to know me, you know, we've gotten to know each other. You know, you can look at the glass half full or half empty. Either way, the glass has water in it, and that's a good start. And where do we go from there? You know, we sat and talked with CEOs of multiple companies and organizations a few weeks ago, and you talked about leadership. And everybody now is complaining about the quote-unquote new millennium employee. And complaining about it doesn't fix anything. Adjusting to where you can get the most out of them and they can get the most out of themselves is a priority.
We'll start there and we'll take a break. How do you motivate people who are quote unquote old school toward that direction?
Yeah, well, first of all, for the first time in the history of the American labor force, we have 4 generations working together. And they all think differently, they all grew up differently, they're all motivated differently. And I think if you're going to be an effective leader, regardless of your vocation, you've got to be in touch with what motivates them, how they tick and why they tick. It's one of the things that we teach our Executive Leadership Academy, because again, at the end of the day, everything rises and falls on leadership, and our ability to connect, right, with every person determines the effectiveness that we have, right? And so one is building relationships. Believe it or not, getting to know them, what makes them tick, right? What's important to them.
Right.
You know, a lot of companies are having to change their incentive programs because what worked for the older generation does not work for the new generation. There's nothing wrong with that, but here's the problem. Most people, everywhere I go, I ask the question, is growing a good thing? And everybody, 100%. The only problem is growing demands change, and most people don't want to change, right?
No, man.
But it starts with leadership. When leadership wants to be effective and they want to bring the results, then they will take the time to invest and get to know their people.
The do it because I say so or said so era is over.
Oh, it's way over.
It's
yeah,
over.
No, man, it does
you and
not
I
work.
would be, if when the boss spoke, that was it. But listen, we're going to take a quick break and come back with Julio to talk more about goal setting and what's happening in the capital region. What's his assessment on how businesses are doing here? We'll come back and talk about that next. Back with Julio Melara with the Baton Rouge Business Report. So how is Baton Rouge or the capital region doing right now?
Well, you know, it's interesting if you listen to the national chatter, right? I mean, you know, you're hearing recession, you're hearing interest rates going up, you're hearing inflation, and all of that is true, right? But one of the things that we don't appreciate enough is the economy and the place that we live. You know, I was telling a group of CEOs a couple of weeks ago that the good thing about the capital region is that when the economy, the national economy is on fire, we're never on fire. When the national economy is in the dumps, we're never in the dumps. I mean, we have, going back to this cadence, right? I mean, we're never too high, we're never too low. So that's a real good thing for us. And there are a couple of driving factors of it, right? Besides what we already know, we're the state capital, we've got 2 universities. You know, you take a look at our petrochemical industry, right? And because of the macro and geopolitical issues going on worldwide, we are in a great position to help fill the void in a lot of sectors, not just chemicals, but energy, right? That's one. I don't think there's a deep appreciation for the health care, you know, that we have here. When you take a look at Our Lady Lake, the General, Woman's, Ochsner, Baton Rouge Clinic, Maribor Perkins, the Children's Hospital, I mean, we are in great hands for the per capita and all the health care possibilities and opportunities that we have here taking care of our people and our community. And it's a growing sector, by the way. Technology is another one.
Yeah. Currently on shelves across the region, the Business Reports edition is the Book of Lists that lists all of companies in this region and various different industries and sectors. And you talk to a number of these CEOs. There are lots of names on that list that we know. When you talk to them, what's their biggest complaint and what is their biggest point of excitement here?
Yeah, well, I think that the biggest issue is workforce, right? And it's a constant battle. We're one of the few states in the the nation over the last 5 years that has out-migration, right? And so we have got to continue to be diligent and focused on keeping our young talent here. That's one of my personal initiatives, right? We have a lot of young talent. As a matter of fact, Clay, just real quickly, one of the things that most of the community is not aware of, it's exciting the number of young entrepreneurs. Our entrepreneurial ecosystem has so much potential, right? But the community's got to come behind it and help them scale, help the momentum there in a bunch of different ways. Because again, the number one issue is workforce. Right? Is recruiting talent, keeping it here. Our number one export right now in Louisiana is not oil and gas; it's our people.
So to that point, have we stemmed that tide at all in the last decade? Because I remember, really in this early century, that was a big discussion then. When a group of business people went to Austin, Texas and got a chance to see what Austin was doing, that was one of the takeaways there. Have we stemmed the tide at all?
No, the answer is no. No, the answer is no. And look, there's a big difference. Speaking of the new year, there's good intentions, and then there's intentional living and intentional actions. And I think this is one where a lot of people recognize the problem, but a lot of people have given it lip service. And there's not a silver bullet. I mean, you need quality of life. You need great work environments, great organizations, right? You know, and again, even now, you were talking about earlier, you know, we've got to attack crime, right?
Yeah. For people who are setting goals, what is your advice to people about effective goal setting, which actually shouldn't start in January, by the way? It should have started before now. But how do you advise people to be effective in setting realistic goals?
Yeah, I want to go back to this point. There's a big difference. Most people have good intentions, but it's about intentionally living. Right, and so I think you need to be very, very specific. Any road will take you there if you don't know where you're going.
Right.
Right. It says in Hosea that my people perish for lack of vision. You got to have a vision for what do you want in your marriage, with your children, with your family, with your health, with your finances, and of course, certainly we talk about our careers, right? And I think again, one of the greatest, simplest analogies, they got to be SMART goals, right? They got to be specific, right? They got to be measurable, right? They got to be achievable, right? They've got to be relevant, right? What's really, really important, and they got to be timely, right? Everything needs to have some type of deadline. And so as we write them down, which of course most people don't, which is the reason that February 1st, right? They call them resolutions.
Right.
It could be goals, but they go out the window, right? All the time.
Right. What about you? I got a minute left. What are your goals for 2023?
I want to continue to help transform Baton Rouge. As a matter of fact, we had our company meeting, and I have a word every year for myself and for our family. I also have a word for my company, and our word for the year as an organization is purpose. We write on purpose, we sell on purpose, we design on purpose, we have events on purpose. We want to continue to connect people and help transform Baton Rouge and help it reach its potential on purpose.
Subscribe to the Daily Report, get the business report in 225 magazine. There may be a picture of Matt Mascona doing some foolishness in here from earlier. That might end up. Mayor President Sharon Weston Broome did her State of the City address this week. Next week, she'll come on the show to talk more with you and me about that. You guys have a blessed weekend. Catch you next week on The Clay Young Show.